The phone buzzed at 3 in the morning. Marcus stared at the unknown number, his heart already knowing what his mind refused to accept. Sarah was gone. 23 years of silence, and now this call from her sister, telling him about the accident, about how Sarah had whispered his name in her final moments. He set the phone down with trembling hands, walked to his study, and pulled out a letter he'd kept hidden for over 2 decades. The paper was yellowed now, the ink slightly faded, but every word burned as fresh as the day she'd written it. I know you think choosing your career over us makes you strong, Marcus, but someday you'll realize that the strongest thing you could have done was stay. The memory crashed over him like a wave. It was 1998, and he was 26, standing in their tiny apartment overlooking the Chicago River. Sarah sat on their second-hand couch, her dark hair catching the afternoon light, holding the acceptance letter from Stanford Medical School. Her eyes were bright with tears, but not the happy kind. "This is everything you've worked for," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm so proud of you." But Marcus heard what she didn't say. Stanford was 3,000 miles away. She had her teaching job here, her family, her life, and he had a choice to make. "Come with me," he said, though they both knew it was impossible. Her mother was sick, her father struggling with the family business. Sarah was the glue holding everything together. "You know I can't," she whispered. "But you have to go. This is your dream." That's when his pride kicked in, that stubborn voice that had driven him through medical school, through every challenge he'd ever faced. "Then we both know what this means," he said, his voice colder than he intended. Sarah looked up at him, and for a moment he saw something break behind her eyes. "Is that really how you want to end this? After 4 years together?" He could have said so many things. He could have told her he loved her more than any career, more than any dream. He could have said they'd find a way, that love was supposed to conquer everything. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and said, "Some things are more important than feelings, Sarah. This is about my future." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah folded the letter carefully, set it on the coffee table, and stood up. "You're right. Your future, not ours." She packed that night, while he sat in his study, convincing himself he was making the rational choice. When he heard the door close behind him, he told himself it was for the best. He was going to be a surgeon. He was going to save lives. He was going to matter. And he did. Dr. Marcus Chen became one of the most respected cardiac surgeons on the West Coast. He had the house in Marin County, the awards on his wall, the respect of his colleagues. He'd saved thousands of lives, performed miracles with his hands. But he never married. Oh, there had been relationships, smart, accomplished women who understood his dedication to his work, but none of them had Sarah's laugh, or the way she'd curl up next to him on Sunday mornings, reading him funny articles from the newspaper in different voices. He'd looked her up over the years, of course. Social media made it impossible not to. She'd become a principal, married a kind-looking man named David, had 2 children. In every photo, she looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way that Marcus's chest ached.
There was one photo that haunted him particularly. Sarah at her daughter's graduation, her arm around a girl who had her mother's eyes and smile. The caption read, "So proud of Emma for getting into Northwestern, following in Mom's footsteps, but making her own path. Love wins every time. Love wins every time." The words had echoed in his head for months after he'd seen that post. Now, sitting in his study at 3 in the morning, Marcus understood what Sarah had tried to tell him all those years ago. Strength wasn't about choosing ambition over love. Strength was about finding a way to honor both. Strength was about believing that the people who loved you were worth fighting for, worth building a life around. He thought about all the patients he'd saved, all the families he'd reunited with their loved ones. He'd spent his career mending hearts, but he'd never learned how to mend his own. The funeral was small, intimate. Marcus stood in the back, watching as Sarah's family and friends shared stories about her kindness, her dedication to her students, the way she'd light up any room she entered. Her daughter Emma spoke about how her mother had taught her that success meant nothing if you didn't have people to share it with. After the service, David approached him. Marcus tensed, expecting anger or resentment, but David's eyes held only sadness. "She talked about you sometimes," David said quietly, "especially when the kids were making big decisions. She'd say, 'I hope they choose love. I hope they're braver than we were.'" Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. "I wasn't brave at all," he whispered. David nodded. "She knew that. But she also knew you were young and scared and trying to do what you thought was right. She forgave you a long time ago, Marcus. Maybe it's time you forgave yourself." That night, Marcus sat in his empty house, surrounded by all the trappings of his successful life, and finally let himself grieve, not just for Sarah, but for the life they could have had, for the man he could have been if he'd chosen differently. He thought about all the letters she'd written, the one he'd kept all these years. In it, she'd said something else, something he tried to forget. "I'll always love the boy who used to read me poetry in the park, who believed we could change the world together. I hope someday you remember him too." Marcus walked to his bookshelf and pulled out the volume of Pablo Neruda they'd shared in college. The pages fell open to a poem he'd marked long ago. "Love is so short, forgetting is so long." He'd spent 23 years proving that line true, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to prove it wrong. Maybe he could honor Sarah's memory by finally learning the lessons she tried to teach him, that love wasn't a weakness to overcome, but a strength to embrace. The next morning, Marcus made a call to the free clinic downtown, the one that served families who couldn't afford his usual fees. It was time to start mending hearts in a different way, to build something that would have made Sarah proud, because sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love differently, even when it's too late to love the person who taught you how.